Simon, welcome back to the channel. You're back because of popular demand. The last video that we made absolutely had the comments on fire. I rewatched it a couple times since then. Still learning more as you dig in because you just gave us so much. And it's nice to have you back.
Okay, thanks for having me, Carl. Yeah, I think we ruffled a few feathers and the comments seemed really great. Like it when people were posting me on X, and so I'm glad to be part of part two because I think you had a lot more questions that we didn't get through.
Yeah, not only did I have more questions at the time I already wanted to ask in the last interview, but when I rewatched the episode, I'm trying to watch that from the perspective. I mean, I did watch a perspective of what I would want to ask a bit more on, just didn't think about it at the time. And I think generally my viewers watch my channel because they often have a similar perspective or mindset to me. So I think this is the best way to kind of dig in. So let's start first with initially we'll talk about some of the things from the last episode that I wanted to touch on a little bit more, and then we'll get into kind of the things we haven't yet. But so what we established from the last interview was effectively, those who control essentially, at least the Western hemisphere and the proof of weapons network. And guys, if you haven't seen part one, you probably should check that out. We'll put it in the link description as well. Before you watch this one, it'll give you a lot of context for this. But so we talked about the proof of weapons system, and primarily it seems like the banks, the BlackRock, the Vanguard, the State Street, and others are really the ones who have the most influence around the world and help shape the direction toward their ultimate goal. Each of them may have slightly different agendas, but they try to align as much as possible. And they're also, they have their scope of the globe that they can actually control, while the other factions have kind of their own alliances as well. Okay, so that's interesting. But what I want to know is are the footmen for these essentially cartels, right? Like how do these plans go into action, and do you have any idea what that looks like? Let's say when BlackRock or someone wants to make an agenda for something to happen, again, for the YouTube algorithm, this is just our own thoughts, our own opinions. We're not saying anything's fact. Yeah, just to clarify that. But maybe that's part of what goes back to when I talked about these guys that sit at a table in super top secret environments where if anyone found out what they were doing, there would definitely be a lot of problems. But someone has to say, this is our plan to get from, A to B. And in order to do that, we need to do this thing, right? And this thing might be one of those things that we talked about. So who are the proof of weapons, essentially hitmen and footmen, and who are initiating the details of that plan? Because none of these events that have happened were, they weren't easy jobs. They were well planned, planned well in advance, and would take a lot of orchestration amongst only people who know about this. I'm just curious. Yeah, so maybe what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so typical, when you look at these criminal networks and you look at mafias and various other institutions, you ask yourself, what would one need to do to turn that into a corporate entity with governance? And the answer is compartmentalization. And so when you have an operation, you have various different layers without anyone knowing the complete picture. Mm-hmm. And so within the CIA, for example, you don't tell the entire CIA staff, about, hey, we're now working on this operation. You give it on a need-to-know basis,
right?
And you make sure that no one has the full picture. But you signal through the media. And so you can push out different things. So whenever I look at the Financial Times, I know that this is kind of what the higher powers of banks that have access to control the media is wanting to push out. And so that's a narrative, as well as there are meetings with business executives. So when business executives meet at these different meetings, whether it be Bilderberg meetings, whether it be World Economic Forum meetings, they're signaling to the corporate interests that need to access capital what the goal is and what they would like to see happen. And so, when Larry Fink pushes out a speech and when Jamie Dimon pushes out a speech, that's what you need if you want to be a part of accessing capital. So if they say it's ESG, you need the right ESG score in order to gain access to capital. And so the financial industrial complex gets to, set through access to capital. And as we talked about in the previous episode, they vassalize so that they can constrict capital and they can signal. So imagine you're a Gulf country that's in an operation with the military industrial complex, and you're saying we're moving from the forever war model to regional stability. And then you decide, BlackRock saying, well, we want to denominate more and more ETFs in this currency, and we're going to push more and more of our investors over to this financial product. And then, someone from a Gulf sovereign wealth could say, well, we were going to invest, 20 million into this company, but now instead we're going to invest it into the Chinese version. And so the Gulf country can signal to Wall Street, you're going off track right now. We're no longer investing in Tesla. We're going to be investing in BYD or something, and so through the signals of capital, which all feed into the different algorithms and data feeds, and the pushing out of media and narratives by controlling the algorithms of the technical industrial complex, you're able to signal. And again, it's not a perfect science because it's not an organized cabal. It is competing interests at the top of power structure that screw each other over all the time. And if they're not in line with a particular agenda, they can knock people off the network by crashing their share prices. So at the moment, last time we talked about Oracle was kicked up the network, was given Paramount, was given very important media assets, TikTok, US version, and then a contract within Oracle to host those servers. But at the same time, you can crash their share price 30% because remember what share prices are a function of today is no longer the reality of the business. It's a function of money printing. And so when Trump says, here's the big, beautiful bill, he basically outlines, as per what BlackRock and the financial industrial complex have reached consensus of who receives that money. The military industrial complex get Pentagon budgets. But then you can say artificial intelligence and cybersecurity is now an important part of our future military strategy. And so you can print in the big, beautiful bill, and then you can go out, for example, a game like constricting the debt ceiling and say, right, we'll push out to all of our various lobby constituencies. If the left win, we get more social programs, which means BlackRock gets to manage more capital because the money goes up in the insurers through to managing through the asset managers. Or you push it in a different direction, which is actually, it's all going to go into Stargate. What's Stargate? $500 billion invested in AI project. Elon, you get this amount. Oracle, you get this amount. And NVIDIA, you get this amount. And so by divvying up and giving these capital signals, you're showing who's complying with the network. And so this is how I think they communicate. So you've got the weaponization of the media, the weaponization of the algorithms, and access to capital flows. And you use compartmentalization so that no one's got the full picture. But obviously, under the military industrial complex, you've got intelligence. And intelligence is, the quote unquote deep state, where you can have those conversations that even presidents may not have access to. And then you compartmentalize that so everybody has plausible deniability. No one's allowed the full picture. But if you look at, for example, COVID, what did they do? They weaponized, so they financially incentivized the privatized hospitals to designate things as a COVID. Yeah. So immediately, and then what did the media do? The media, for the first time, created a death counter on the TV. So every day we were looking at how many people were dying, how many people are dying, and the death counter was going up and up and up and up and up. So that creates, a feeling that we all felt. And then you create left and right divides, and you create civil unrest by saying you're snitching on your person, you're a grandma killer. But prior to that, you already had within the intelligence apparatus and the Pentagon budgets, you had what would we do in the case of a pandemic, and they role played out these different exercises, and so they already knew what it would look like. Now you can imagine that one part of a faction compartmentalized, said money needs to go over to the Wuhan lab, and then they're working on how do we combat these bioweapons. And then it was either released by accident or it was released on purpose. But the second it came out, the technical industrial complex knew, all right, this is the perfect opportunity to get everybody addicted to technology, get everybody locked down on their phones, and really push the algorithms and censor any counter narrative, saying you shouldn't have this injected in you. In fact, you just need to go out and have access to vitamin D. And actually, these masks are constricted. You can spread misinformation and censor the information that you don't want people to have. And so through this combination, you create this very controlled but imperfect power struggle, where then even if somebody, like, if I remember originally, Boris Johnson was kind of following Donald Trump and say, I'm not going to wear a mask, we're not going to do lockdowns. But suddenly, Trump pivoted to, what was the operation? Operation Warp Speed. And then every leader goes in compliance, because if you don't follow the network, let's say you're in Brazil and you want to resist against it and you want to support your economy, then suddenly you get a covert operation and a press and PR campaign to destroy your reputation. Now, one of the most important things, they always want compromised people in charge. And so by everybody being compromised, everybody has to have dark skeletons in their closet. Whether it's a Macron and his, partner and, various other things which entertain people in terms of conspiracy theories. But everybody on in the top of the power structure, that is able to push out these narratives because they control media, everybody knows that they're all compromised. And so there's a prisoner's dilemma, where if you release information about someone else, then it's coming back to you. And so you always have to have blackmail on everybody. And you always have to have these tools in your back pocket to ensure compliance with the overarching agenda. And that's why it's very important to construct these financial weapons of mass destruction, and have people borrowing against their stock, because leverage is the key to control. If you owe money, you are owned by that agenda. If you sell your shares to shareholders, you are owned by that agenda. And they want more and more, rewarding the behavior you want and punishing the behavior they don't want. And it creates this incentive mechanism where things look very conspiratorial and coordinated. But in fact, I think it's very compartmentalized. And you can kind of go where you want. You could say, yeah, they did that on purpose. Or you could say, well, it happened. And now we know how to weaponize it. And, you pick your where you want to go. And if you say the wrong thing, the algorithm will get you.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so that was a great explanation of kind of how things work, but it might still be can you just give us like a very quick, short reenactment of how, and again, for algorithm, this is just hypothetical. We're not actually saying anything happened, but let's say hypothetically that 9/11 was intentionally orchestrated by the proof of weapon system or whatever. Like, without explaining things in too much detail, can you just give a little short story of I mean, do we think that the intent of that was the Patriot Act, to open up spying all over the world and enable that kind of more legally? Yeah. And then, so if that was the initial intent of it, how would that have played out with so many? I mean, a lot of people say that it was Bush's responsibility, and that's just because they don't have any idea how things work behind the scenes. But can you just quickly give us an example of how those like those different players that were involved acted in that way in order to kind of achieve the goal that was, again, the kind of desired outcome from somebody?
Yeah. So I did a 4-hour blog on simondixon.com where I went through all the FBI papers and all the documents and all the WikiLeaks documents and, combined it with, everything that was released by the intelligence and the FBI investigations. So remember, people think like the CIA and the FBI are the same thing. You'll have compartmentalization. You can have an FBI that's doing a genuine investigation, and the CIA are throwing different parts off that network to the extreme of where they disappear in buses or car accidents. So these types of things happen, and I did 4 hours. If someone really wants to break down everything that we know about 9/11, but what is clearly disclosed is that there were segments of something that was set up after the assassination of King Faisal in Saudi Arabia. There was a network that was set up called the Safari Club. And you can look this up. These are disclosed things. These aren't conspiracy theories. You can ask AI if you want to go more into it. But that was a network between, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, France, European forces, American forces, and Israel was outside of the network. But there was a Safari Club. And then if you look at who was behind 9/11, there were different types of compartmentalization. There was the money laundering and the funding. And you've got some of the people in the Trump administration, like Steve Witkoff, that lent money to Urban Movers. Urban Movers was a shell Mossad Israeli company. Now, Steve Witkoff is, the envoy to the Middle East that's negotiating some of these deals right now. But you can look through and you can follow the money around those different shell companies. Now, those shell companies were all connected to Mossad intelligence, not because I'm saying so, because the FBI released everything around those that were arrested and were detained for 9 months. And they blanked out various parts. But you can tell by the length of someone's name and the size of the block that declassifies part of it, that it's likely to be that name and various other things. So people use AI and different tools to deconstruct like these blocked out, declassified documents. So that was a part of it. Now, the funding was via Saudi intelligence, but the operation was clearly, to me, from the evidence that I've seen, CIA. And so who does CIA work for? Well, they mainly work for the military-industrial complex because it's about 10% national interest, 90% corporate interest. So you got to think about who benefits from this. Prior to 9/11, there were multiple attempts at achieving the same operation. There was the 1993 bombing as well as what happened on 9/11. So there were multiple attempts at this. And you can also see that there was a predetermined plan called the Clean Break Memo of which countries the military-industrial complex wanted to destabilize and go to war with. There were 7 countries on that list: Sudan, Libya, Iran, Iraq, and I forget some of the others, but all six of them were destabilization campaigns that are still in war to this moment. I think it was also Lebanon on there, and Syria, of course. Yeah. So immediately they connected Iraq, which is completely ironic because Saddam Hussein was mainly an ally of America at the time, and Iran was funded via an operation called the Iran-Contra. And so America was funding both sides of like the Iran-Iraq war through these different mechanisms. And anyway, you can see that it starts from CIA, then it goes out to the allies on the network, mainly through things like Safari Club and various other things. And then you ask, you've got a pre-plan for war. What does that mean? Well, war is destabilization. How do you stop the Middle East from unifying around their oil? You destabilize them. You put them in forever wars. What else do you benefit from that? Well, you can use sanctions in order to destroy the economy, and you can push them into IMF debt. So now you can get demand for dollars, and you can get debt's vassalization. At a certain point, you can then do a colored revolution, overthrow the leader, put in a puppet leader, and then they can beg to say, what have I got to do for sanction relief? And to get sanction relief, you want the economy to be destroyed and the people to be as dissatisfied with the leadership as possible. Because what you're trying to engineer is a revolution, that you want the people to turn against the leader so that then they have more negotiation power. And then the banks jump in and they say, right, well, we will lend you this amount of money, but before we remove sanctions, we want to invest in this land, these resources, this reconstruction contracts, and we want to get the best deal. What do and the more and more violence you put them through, the better the deal. Now at home, you manufacture civil unrest. You create racial tensions, religious tensions. You weaponize the algorithm and the media to radicalize Americans against the Muslims and various other the weapons that you can use in order to justify why you're going to war. Now, if the more fear you can inject into the American people, there was a document that was already written called Patriot Act. It was pre-written before 9/11. So you take the documents you've written, the operations that have already been game theoried out, the wars that you already wanted, and now you've got the narrative. And so there was, if you remember what followed, they needed to connect Al-Qaeda to Iraq because they wanted to invade Iraq. And so they did anthrax, they pushed anthrax out there, and they did these fake anthrax operations on the media, where some of the media personalities said, and in the letter that they opened that was meant to have anthrax in, it said, "Death to America, death to Israel." And so they have these very orchestrated messages that kind of tie everything together to make the Americans think they're coming after your freedom. They want to kill you. And then there is a side benefit that comes from that. When you kill civilians and you kill their family and you kill their children, you create the next wave of radicalized people. Those radicalized people then join an army and they infiltrate the intelligence of these groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the leadership are working for the destabilization campaign while they take the victims of the war and they're able to recruit them into a training camp and pay them via what on the front looks like aid. They call it USAID. So they say, yes, we're the good people. We're going to be feeding and helping this country, but it's actually going via these money laundering networks into radicalized training camps. So that then you can say, when these people are part of the army, you send them through to destabilize a country like Syria, and then you can use that in order to pay to get. So, for example, the Kurds were paid to conquer Syria's oil. And then now the deep state has these slush funds that they can use through the money laundering network in order to pay for the things that they could never do under congressional. So, these different types of plans. And you could imagine that there are layers and layers of who knows what's going on there or who's happening. But at the very top, they need to compartmentalize But I think it comes back to, pumping up the price of the stocks, perpetuating the dollar, rolling over the debt, and then engineering the environment that makes them, vassalized to the proof of weapons network.
Yeah, and then implement, the long-term goal of more surveillance that the people asked for, right? Because they were scared to death, and you told them this is going to fight terrorists.
There's another part of it. If you look at the Israeli part as well, you can weaponize the fact that anti-Semitism historically was like a European thing. Jew hatred was like, a European thing. It led to the Hitler regime. It led to the Holocaust. You can essentially weaponize previous traumas to recruit armies. Like for Israel, you can get all the Jews to go to Israel, get the population growth, and they have to join the army. So you build a radicalized army that believe that the operations that you're funding to fight Israel want to kill the Jews. And so you get both sides of those narratives because you're paying the group that's resisting. Even like things like, by the way, Iran wasn't the funder of Hamas, for example. That was Qatar. And Qatar is an ally of America. They've got the largest military base. And they were asked by America, to host the office for Hamas. And so via Qatar, you get this money through. And then you have the people that are genuinely resisting. And then you also create confusion like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and just create absolute mess. But through the Israeli mechanism, you get to do all the illegal shit that you'd never be able to do. So hacking operations, really, really like genocidal operations, ethnic cleansing operations. And you get to do that via an outpost with plausible deniability. Now, here's the important part. So that when you're ready to dump that group, it just looks like those are the crazy people. Those are the evil people. Those are the ones that were running the Mossad Jeffrey Epstein network. And you get to blame it on them. And the Americans get to say, we were the good people. We were just blackmailed. We were coerced by this country that rules us. Then you look at all the AIPAC funding, which was done by Americans. And it makes it look like you were controlled by Israel so that you can have a plausible deniability, controlled and managed divorce at the exact moment. And that's what's happening right now. But you can still use the media to push Muslim hatred and Jew hatred, which creates the civil unrest campaign. So then you can weaponize the algorithms, give something like X to Elon Musk. He can borrow against his stock. Then you've got freedom of speech, not freedom of reach. Get everyone say we can't censor anymore, but we can get you to talk. We won't give you traffic, but we want you to talk. And then that builds your social credit score, which is the next agenda. And get everyone driving electric cars. Then we got all the data from everyone's driving vehicles. We got all the Doge data. We've got all the social media data because we know that when there is violence, we're ready for that social credit score. We want to punish the way you spend and link it with the stable coin.
So I want to come back to this kind of the Elon thing, because that's something that I think is very confusing for a lot of people. So we'll get back to that in just a second. Before that though, I just kind of want to try to get something that I'm still a little bit confused on. So just now on the 9/11 example, you kind of walk through how that was all orchestrated, but you said from the top. And so this is the part on the first question is, this is such an elaborate plan. And like you said, it's kind of an unorganized plan that happens through different interested parties or whatever. But there must be some sort of, maybe they're analysts at these big banks and the BlackRock, Vanguard, and others who kind of say like, this is what our objective is. This is what we want for the future. And so, in the next 12 months, we're going to execute this plan or something like that. And then pass it over to CIA and say, hey, you need to come up with a plan for how to kind of do this. and then the CIA gives Trump's intelligence team some sort of narrative to go off of that they believe is real because it's coming from his trusted intelligence guys, and so then he does something. I'm trying to understand just that, like who is at the top planning these things to happen to send down to all the other agencies, countries, media and stuff like that to propagate it.
Yeah, I mean, you're never going to get this is the person. You're going to get organized institutional structures, access to capital with the financial industrial complex. Underneath that, the military industrial complex. Under that, the intelligence apparatus.
Right. So just
everything is whose budget, who's going to get the budget.
So just at the top there, though. So when you say like these organized, kind of the proof of weapons system, do you think, to the best of your knowledge or ability, that they have internal operations that are very top secret within them that try to figure out, look 15, 20, 50 years ahead and have like a long-term roadmap, and kind of like each of them maybe internally have, their compartmentalized departments, and then they maybe chat with Blackguard, chats with Vanguard in some degree, and like they kind of start looking at how something like this could happen and who had been like all the details of what could happen from something like this, and then they pass down some sort of one part of that initiative to intelligence or to whoever they do. You think I'm just trying to figure out like how these plans are created, and at least to the best of their goal of what they want to do, and then how that actually gets implemented. And that's all. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, from my perspective, I believe there's a well understood model of how to profit from a war. And so you have intelligence that could set the strategy, and military and financial know how to fund it, and military know how to profit from it, and how to take that order and that chain. And so you got the compartmentalization, and then media knows how to push the narrative. So again, it's a network. I don't think you're going to find one person on the top. You're going to see compartmentalized goals with no one having the full story, which pushes out to the end goal. An important part of it is I use a lot of game theory in thinking about these things. So, because I kind of did economics. In game theory, you have things called infinite games and finite games. And in infinite games, think of a sovereign country. I'd give an example. The most sovereign country I know today is China, because it's got a manufacturing base, it's got a banking system that is owned by the government. The government ultimately is not controlled by a corporate structure. And so you don't have a 4-year election cycle and 2-year, intern, whatever it is called, midterms, that we're about to line up to. And so through this more authoritarian type of leadership with capital controls, you have what's called an infinite game. And an infinite game means you can have a 100-year plan. Because, you as a leader that may be in charge for 20 to 30 years, or Xi Jinping, you pass on your plan to the next on an infinite horizon. And what is a good plan? A good plan is reinvest everything in infrastructure and our people. Make sure our people own their own real estate. Make sure people are benefiting from the growth of the country, because rather than having 10% of the world own the land and the real estate, you have 95% penetration of real estate ownership in China. So then you create less likely to have revolutions, because you're like a shareholder through your real estate in the country. The issue that America's having right now is that fewer and fewer people are shareholders in the S&P and real estate. And so therefore you're creating a dissatisfied population that doesn't feel like they're benefiting, and everything's about extraction. And so that's kind of what you're seeing right now. So that's an example of an infinite game. Then you think about corporations. They're actually in finite games. The closer you are to finite games means you have a set time period. So a corporation in America has 90 days to appease their shareholders. And if they don't do what they're meant to do within that 90 days, they're going to have a rough time. They're not going to get access to capital. Their share price is going to be impacted. And their shareholders might reallocate capital, which then in turn incentivize their stock options, their ultimate, incentives. And so therefore, you've got a short-term game at the corporate level. You've got a finite game. You are playing a 60, a 30-day game, a 90-day game. And then in the case of the fund management side, you're judged at the end of the year. This month, all the fund managers will be judged. So they have a 1-year game to determine whether they're going to access capital when they publish their return on investment. Now, what does the Trump administration has a 2-year game on purpose by design. So you only get to do something for a small period of time, and then you need to reset back to your lobbies and reach back out to your lobbies and those that are able to manipulate media and say, right, what have I got to do to get media support?
When you say 2-year game, does that mean because they need to win the midterms to keep the same power control they have now?
Yeah, so ultimately you've got a 4-year game that's split into two to make it even more impossible to have any autonomy.
Yeah.
Because immediately you need to go back to get your vote. Your vote doesn't come from the people. Your vote comes from the lobbies. If the lobbies agree to put you will allocate money to their agenda, the Pentagon budget, the rolling over of the debt, and you will continually give new bonds to, the Federal Reserve, the banks that get to receive the yield on those bonds. Your job as a president is a debt dealer. You're a bond dealer. Your job is to create a narrative that gets people to buy more treasuries. That's it. And then in order to get more treasuries, you have to appease your lobbies. And in order to appease your lobbies, you need to signal the right narrative to the people. And they can push the media in any direction to make you, destroy you, assassinate you. If you're not in line with the military, you get JFK'd. Or they can use lawfare, whatever they need to do to get you to comply. Okay. But they make it a finite game so that you can never be autonomous. So you've got the corporate structure, which is a quarterly game. You've got the fund management structure, which is a 1-year game. You've got the political game, which is 2 years and 4 years. And then you've got infinite game. The smaller the time frame, the more short-term thinking you get. The more short-term thinking you get, the less long-term strategies you do, which it gets more and more unethical what you're willing to do. And so, at the moment, you'll have all the fund managers that were knocked off the network making their desperate trades right now to remain and get the access to capital that they need.
Yeah.
Or they'll engage in fraud. They'll take their private equity, they'll market to market, and then they'll borrow against their net asset value. And then they'll use that to make a risky trade and maybe buy some Bitcoin ETFs or something. And then they'll engineer an elaborate short strategy, through the hedge fund network and the derivatives in order to pump up their return. And Bitcoin's a beautiful tool for them to play these short-term, finite game. And that's why they need things like strategy, because you can very clearly engineer, because Bitcoin's an infinite asset. It's the ultimate infinite asset. It's got a fixed supply. It's got no executives. It's got no corporate structure. It's got no governance. It's a commodity, so it's the ultimate infinite game of all of the games, which is why I believe it's the purest. But if you want to control Bitcoin short term, you wrap it into a finite game with a 3-month corporate structure and then create lots of financial weapons of mass destruction to manipulate it and enhance your returns in those annual games that the fund managers are playing.
Right. Okay. What I mentioned earlier, as you were just talking, I think most of that became really clear about the Elon question. I was just going to, just going to get your thoughts on the fact that, Elon claims that, he saw a world where we were being, a US mostly, where we were being divided at a rapid level, that Twitter previously was headquartered in SF, where it was mostly all employees who were controlling everything under Jack Dorsey, but Jack Dorsey was mostly checked out. We're kind of taking away freedom of speech, inflecting the agenda of kind of the left, and he wanted to buy it so that he could stop censoring things and get rid of all those people who are trying to push their agenda through the platform and make it like a true open town square. And so, to everyone, that seems like he just bought it because he was trying to give us a place for free speech, and I think that he genuinely probably did that. But I was trying to think when you said, talked about Elon and that, the X will implement, and we already know they're going to do the whole banking thing and money transmitting and everything like that, and that they would likely do a social credit scoring system and things like this. At first, I thought to myself, okay, well, probably if Elon had any choice in that, like, he wouldn't do those kind of things. Maybe, I don't know where his head's really at, but but I thought it would be so hypocritical if he came in saying all these things that made everyone love him so much, and then went and did something awful like implementing social credit scoring system alongside with their digital ID and your payment connected to permissioned payment rails and things like that. But I guess we've also heard him say he's not going to break the law. He's going to do what is kind of like, he's not going to break the law, right? Like, he believes in staying in America and following the law and doing what you're supposed to do. So I guess that's not even, he doesn't even have this decision at that point, right? If it comes down from the lawmakers, then he has to follow what they request, and they'll make it sound to most people like it's a very reasonable kind of thing to do, until it's too late, probably. And I don't. It sounds like Elon doesn't even have a say in what happens there. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I just want to get your quick thoughts on that.
Yeah. So Jack Dorsey created Twitter. It secured its funding from Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is a feeder fund for Wall Street. You go public, and you are fully captured. Your net worth is based upon, being able to borrow against your stock and all the different things and constructs that are created, and you have to comply. Now, then you have an intelligence part of that, which is, we need access to the data. You have to build a backdoor to the NSA. You have to do that. You don't get a choice in that. There's no resistance against that. The only way to resist against that is to do what Satoshi did. You have to build technology where you can't control it, and they don't know who you are. Any centralized company has to comply to the network, particularly in the American public markets. So Elon comes along and says, right, we're going to release the Twitter files, which exposes the censorship. And he had to get the permission of the financial industrial complex to borrow against his Tesla stock, to raise the money in order to buy X, and then went out to the Gulf countries and said, will you co-invest? And so the financial industrial complex is working on a multipolar operation with the Gulf countries. The Gulf countries say, yeah, I'll invest with you, but here's what we want. We want our data here. We want that. And so you get these terms and conditions that comes with every investment. And so obviously the backdoor gets, that was all the Snowden revelations. We know that the social credit, every accusation is a confession. If America's accusing China of building a social credit score, they're building a social credit score, but they're doing it covertly rather than overtly. And so everything that is accused is a confession, normally is a general rule. And so the agenda changed. The agenda is that, we've done the censorship thing. Now it's a data play. We're moving to artificial intelligence. We're using this artificial intelligence. We gave it to our chosen entrepreneurs from the Pentagon budgets in order to roll it into their Silicon Valley wrapper, stroke public company, stroke private equity wrapper. And now we're going to release that and commercialize it. It starts, most of the technological innovation that we use started as an innovation for killing people, for war. You know, GPS, all of them. You go through all the technologies. And they also needed resources that was from killing people in Africa, you know, or killing people in other countries. You know, everything, all the innovation comes from those Pentagon budgets, the military-industrial complex, the Department of Defense, and then they privatize it. So they socialize the losses and privatize the gains. And so you end up with a Palantir coming out of nowhere. You end up with a Tesla coming out of nowhere. You know, you end up with these different things. But yeah, so you borrow against it. That's the vassalization. And then you have to serve their agenda. So we switch from a censorship-led algorithmic control agenda to a data agenda. When Elon bought it, what did the first thing he said? Right, we're going to attack the bots by having verified accounts. KYC. Where was the KYC done? Israel. Israel is is where your data is going. And then it goes back into the network onto Oracle database or Access databases or various other people in the network. So you get access to these contracts by compliance to the network. And so that's exactly, how these things work. But now you need freedom of speech, not freedom of speech. So everything in America is PR and narrative. So you got to follow the money behind the PR and narrative. The PR and narrative is, how do we justify this to people? And most people are just useful idiots for the PR and narrative because they buy all this shit, not knowing, how this all works. So freedom of speech, not freedom of reach, was talk. We'll build your profile. And now what happens? Last week, you can now verify publicly that I created my account in the United Kingdom and I live in the Isle of Man. That's one step further. And it would just creep up until then you become a fully regulated financial service provider. At that point, you are in regulatory capture, and who owns the regulators? It goes up to the Fed, that is owned by the Proof of Weapons Network. So now you're in Genius Act legislation, lobbying, and regulatory capture. So now Elon goes to prison if he doesn't report suspicious transactions. If he doesn't implement surveillance, he goes to prison. If he doesn't have tracking every source of funds, every source of wealth, every transaction, making sure that it was layers and layers deeper, implement chain analysis. Once you're a regulated institution, you are now going to prison if you don't bow down to that goal. The regulators thinks they're regulating, but who wrote the legislation? You think it was Senate and Congress. Senate and Congress were the lobby. The lobby is the money printers.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And learning from what we've discussed both in last episode and today, I'm curious about, and maybe I'll do my best to kind of discuss like Russia, Ukraine, right? And so I think in this situation, since Russia is mostly not part of the Western proof of weapon system, right? It's more on the kind of
they tried to pre-Putin between the fall of the Soviet Union and Putin. They wanted to vassalize it, financialize it, securitize it, and turn it into part of the Western Hemisphere and align it with Europe. But Putin was a resistance against that.
Yeah. So that was already brewing for a while, and then you had Ukraine, who had constant attempts from Russia before, and little smaller kind of wars, but eventually, Russia came hard through the borders, initiated the war, and from what I've heard, is there was actually several times where there was like a peace treaty ready to be signed by both sides, and the U.S. told Zelensky not to sign it. And then I don't remember if it was before or after that, but at some point, with everything destroyed, and from what I know of Ukraine, from being there several times, it's a beautiful country with a lot of resources, and I could see it with, coming really a boom country if it were away from civil unrest. So, but then what we saw is we saw BlackRock come in and do all the deals to help rebuild Ukraine. And I think from a public sentiment, that really looks like a hero flag for BlackRock, right? But this is kind of what we've been talking about. It's actually what you just said earlier, was that they go in, create panic and war, destabilize a country, and then someone like BlackRock goes in and assures they'll help rebuild everything, so that they essentially kind of own Ukraine at that point, and all the real estate and all the deals that are being done for mineral rights and all these kinds of things. So is that mostly an accurate kind of analysis on what's going on? And so does that mean that it stops at some point, or what are your thoughts?
So we're I believe midway through the cycle. I don't believe the peace plan happens because I think there's about another $1 trillion that BlackRock can make, and they'll do it to the last Ukrainian. And so this network has no ethics. They are the very same people that will have a company that creates a gun that is designed for a 7-year-old kid to hold. There is these finite games do not allow for ethics or the normal way that humans analyze in these finite games. And so it is designed that way. Now, what the operation from my perspective was America's controlled by the proof of weapons network, which mainly is the financial industrial complex. The financial industrial complex wanted to vassalize Europe. And so this was the perfect strategy for full vassalization of Europe. Now, they knew that you couldn't beat Russia, but they could push Russia into a game. And Russia, you could reignite a Cold War 2.0. Now, how do you get a Cold War 2.0? Well, America can no longer influence or exert the same power because there's the rising powers, China, BRICS, the regional powers. So it can only go local. And so it needs to recreate the banana republic, which is where, the fruit companies were destroying South and Latin America and in order to protect those fruit trades, and Europe. And so Europe is the new playground. And so if you look at the WikiLeaks documents, just put Ukraine in WikiLeaks and you can see all the leaked documents. You'll see that every single attempt. So there was a coup in 2014. That's a colored revolution to overthrow the leadership to someone that was going to bow down to the military industrial complex. Later, you end up with Zelensky, and Zelensky he might as well work for Lockheed Martin and General Dynamic, just like Keir Starmer does, and various others. But it was to use all of the weapons, sanctions. So you sanction Russia, use covert warfare, blow up Nord Stream Pipeline 2, and use access to capital, BlackRock, ESG. So you get them to turn off their nuclear power plants. You get them to invest trillions in renewable energy based upon a climate change PR narrative. You radicalize people into thinking that they're winning if they get more climate change and more investment in renewable energy. BlackRock is allocating that investment via the European Central Bank printing the money and the Bank of England printing the money. The Bank of England is printing the money, going out to USAID, controlling BBC, controlling Ukrainian media, pretending they're defending democracy, push out a narrative. Suddenly, I don't know if you remember. Do you remember I don't know if you were ever what it was like in America, but I remember watching the BBC and we had the death counter from COVID. And every day we were being told that we're grandma killers if we don't inject ourselves. And we need booster 1, booster 2, booster 3, booster 4. And we're unethical if we're not doing it. And overnight, BBC stopped counting the deaths. We were allowed to go out and everything was fine. There was no like anything else. But suddenly we had to believe that Putin is Hitler. And so overnight, the death counter was switched by we're defending democracy. The Putin, aka Hitler, is trying to expand the USSR, even though they can't financially afford the USSR. It's a ridiculous concept. And so the narrative changed. That was the day that the media decided that we were now the defenders of democracy. So they radicalized the Europeans into thinking that that's what we were doing, and justified the fact that we got drug addiction, homelessness, horrible infrastructure, governments are no longer collecting bins, famine, things are happening across the country, degeneracy, all sorts of problems in the country. But now we need to send $3 billion to Ukraine. And so that all goes up to the US stock market. And the vassalization campaign has been perfect. Europe is destroyed. The countries are providing the collateral. Ukraine has basically tokenized or securitized all of their wheat resources. They've negotiated the rare earth mineral mining contracts into the future. And Russia will get more and more territory because they can't win. And America, the military doesn't care. This is just a line on their balance sheet. This is just revenue for them. BlackRock doesn't care because the worse it gets, the more leverage they get in their negotiations. And you can persuade the European Union and the ECB to print another 750 trillion euros and sanction 350 billion euros. And where's that money going to go? Redeveloping Ukraine, which is who's going to get those contracts? BlackRock portfolio companies. And so Russia's going to own Ukraine. This network will fight till the last Ukrainian. Eventually, there won't be any more Ukrainians in the army. And at that point, you've printed all the money you can get, and you managed to pump $1 trillion into the US stock market.
I just want to be clear on what you just said. Do you believe that Russia will acquire all of Ukraine, or just the Donbass region or something like that? That they kind of, from what we hear, that's the region that they really care about, which is mostly full of Russians. And then I don't know.
Well, Russia just wants that you've got the CIA and BlackRock against Russia. They're in a negotiation. Russia can conquer more and more territory the longer this goes on for. Mm-hmm. The CIA can sacrifice more and more Ukrainians, and eventually they're going to negotiate, but they're incentivized to keep this as long as possible because they got the money printing of the ECB and Bank of England and IMF. And so essentially, at some point, there will just be, right, now we're going to negotiate peace for real.
Yeah.
And we're not there yet because there's more money to be made.
But I mean, for all these deals are being made to rebuild Ukraine, the mineral rights, et cetera, the Ukraine would still need to exist, right? So that it doesn't have to then they're doing all these discussions and negotiations.
Yeah, but it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller the longer this goes on for. Yeah. So Russia's incentivized to continue.
Yeah.
And BlackRock is incentivized to continue for as long as they can extract more and more and more into their portfolio companies. And that's the game. And so every now and then, the president needs to pretend they're negotiating peace or have an attempt at peace. And then everyone sits down saying, right, how much of Ukraine am I going to get? What oil routes are we going to do? What contract is Chevron going to get? What is ExxonMobil going to get? What is Russia going to be able to do with Germany? And so you just sit down and decide. And then BlackRock might say, nah, we want a little bit more. So we'll do a false flag and fire some drones in Poland and get Poland to print a bunch more money. Make a promise with Poland. By the way, you're going to get this, this, and this. and now you've got to spend 5% of your budget on NATO and pump that into the US stock market. And all of these, basically, the players are just sat there, but the narrative is you're defending democracy. No, you are actually destroying countries and sovereignty.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I want to go into something that is kind of currently happening now in American soil, and around the elections, and what's really been happening for I don't know what it's been. I don't even know how many years, but a long time. A lot of people say that there was this, really elaborate, sophisticated plan through the Open Borders Initiative in America, and they say that really what they're trying to do is they're trying to bring foreigners in, illegal aliens in, and put them in places that have a ton of representative power in the outcome of the House, and also in electoral college seats, right? And so the idea is that if they can get enough illegals in the country in those states, then when the census comes in 2030, they can reassign how many votes each state gets and things like that. And you don't really need, like, what you need is California and basically New York and maybe one or two others to get a couple more seats in the electoral college. And if that happened, then they would really own the next however long in office the Democratic Party would, because they just have too much control on the electoral college. And even, that would also rebalance popular vote and things like that as well. But so that's kind of the idea. And a lot of people say that if Trump didn't win this last election, then we would have essentially, had a system that has been planning something like this for a very long time. And sure, and then you would basically would have, you would lose America at that point, really. I'm not really sure about that, but you have a radically different type of America that the agenda of whatever the left was trying to kind of achieve. And so what are your thoughts on this? I mean, it seems to me, but I'm, I guess, a little bit biased. I'm biased because I like crypto, right? Like, so if so the surface of I'm picking one side or the other, like, but it's also funny that guys like Obama and the Clintons were Democrat. Like, historically, they ran their campaigns on tight borders, and so something shifted there. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on the whole open borders thing. What happened there? Was Trump supposed to win, or was that like a flaw in the plan? And do you kind of agree with the whole intention of what the plan was, right, and how it worked?
Yeah. So in order to buy that story, and of course that is a popular narrative if you're a Republican, then you need to believe that there is a Republican and Democrat, thing going on. I don't believe there is, because the same lobbies control both the Democrats and Republicans. But you get a competing narrative. So in general, the banks benefit from social programs because they manage those assets. That's the Democrat side of the financial industrial complex. But on the Republican side, they both print money. But on the right side, all of that goes into the stock market. So whichever Democrat or Republican, the banks still gain more power. And remember, the K-shaped economy means the longer you print more money, the more extraction from the average American person over to the financial institutions. And so you have both sides. Okay. Now, to believe that narrative, you have to believe that the Democrats want to open borders because they want to bring in people that are more left inclined, more social program inclined, and then take over America. That is a narrative to scare the shit out of Republicans. What is actually happening from my perspective when I follow the money? The financial industrial complex sat in front of a spreadsheet, and remember, they're able to play more infinite games because they don't have to get elections. Now they do have a share price, so they have to meet those goals, which is where the unethical stuff comes in. But they can also simultaneously play some infinite games because they've got the K-shaped economy. They got monetary policy and fiscal policy for their benefit. So they can play some longer term games. One of those longer term games means that you don't care about the country or the people. You only care about asset stripping and resource extraction, which is the reality of today. That is okay. So if you're looking at a spreadsheet and you realize that we're at the end of a debt cycle, we're only going to be able to roll over this dollar for so long until we have to shrink it into a regional currency, like the British Empire. The pound is for the British. No one else gives a shit about the pound unless you're going to Britain. I believe that that's what they want to do with the dollar. They want to turn it into a regional currency, and they want it where over time, over a decade or two, it will be just for the Americans. The way you do that is you weaken the dollar price relative to other countries. That triggers off breaking all of the pegs to the dollar. So if you're Saudi Arabia right now and you've got a currency pegged to the dollar, the weaker the dollar gets, the more you have to sell real resources, i.e. gold or treasuries, in order to protect the peg. Now, if the dollar continues to weaken, eventually you say, I'm not swapping gold to protect this peg. You'll say, I'm gonna sell all my treasuries and I'm gonna keep my gold and I'm gonna depeg because I'm losing gold the longer I defend this peg. And then Hong Kong does the same. And then Singapore does the same. And so strategically, you weaken the dollar by breaking all the pegs. You vassalize Europe. You've got the euro dollar. You've got the petrodollar. And that's what I believe that they are doing as a strategy. Why? Because they're looking at the spreadsheet and saying, this left and right has turned into populism now, which is a highly unproductive population. The more you're arguing about politics, the more unproductive you are. If you look at China, no one's arguing about politics, but they're all productive. They got some authoritarian, they got some human rights issues, they're pissed off, but they know what they got. They know who they work for, they know who's in charge, and they know they can't change that. So they just get on. They just get on with it. But in the left, you've got the point where people are getting divorced, people are killing each other, people are getting addicted to drugs, people are going deeper and deeper into degeneracy. People are using legalized prostitution as a career with OnlyFans. People are, going more and more and more degenerate, and people are hating each other. And that's impact. And they're broker, they're deeper in debt, they're buying burritos and tacos on payment plans. And so what's happening to birth rates? They're shrinking like crazy. And so if you're a global financial institution and you're looking at your portfolio of companies, you'll be like, where's the future labor? So you're going to look at, all right, the Muslim countries are still having children, the Jewish countries are still having children with Israel, and the Africans are still having children. So there's the labor. Where's the manufacturing base? It's in China. They can give us the cheapest rate. Where's the H-1B visas? India. What is India going to do? If you're a company, if Apple could have what they want, they'd hire no people and it would be all robotics and AI. People tolerate humans. They don't want humans. They just tolerate them. So they're looking through that and they're dividing the world up and saying, what are we going to, where are we going to go? Where's the capital? The capital is from the Gulf. How long can we milk this Federal Reserve System? Well, we've almost got everything. We've got a $5 trillion Nvidia company. There's a K-shaped economy in the stock market. Everyone's in debt, and we've got all the assets within our portfolio. Let's just send most of the companies bankrupt. and consolidate more and more and more into a fewer companies and up the portfolio. And what is the future of the West? Well, civil unrest. How do you protect from civil unrest? You have a surveillance state, a police state. You have artificial intelligence. You have universal basic income for those that are completely broke. And you have the rich that have all the assets, and they get their privatized police. And then you privatize everything. You basically destroy the federal level, and you turn everything into a company. ICE is privatized military. You have privatized prisons. And then once you got privatized everything, they need to get government budget. How do you get government budget? All right, so you pay per deportation, you pay per prison incarceration, you create a slave labor from within the prison system, you get cheap labor from the prison system, and you basically just build an incentive structure that pays dividends and revenue based upon arresting more people, incarcerating more people. And that's where we're at right now. You've got everything, and the more people you let in through the borders, the more cheap labor you get, the more arrests you get in the private prison industry. Then you create a scam where, when you're deporting, you get to put them in a hotel. That's happening in UK. Then you create media attention to that, and you enrage the local population. Then you get racial tensions. Then you get religious tensions. You enrage people because they're broke. I got locked down. My business went bust. My wages are down. I'm not getting the jobs. All of the foreigners are getting the jobs. You enrage people to the point where you manufacture these deliberate algorithms. And then what do? You want to reset the order? Okay, Trump in. Tariff policy, beautiful. That reset the world order. Got everyone to BRICS, sent all the small companies bankrupt, got a hidden tax through import tax, and you pushed up the debt like crazy anyway. And you pretend we're bringing back our manufacturing base. And you deploy privatized ICE, and you now get a privatized military state based upon border policies with the technology that you beta tested in Ukraine, Gaza, West Bank, Europe, Saudi, UK, called Palantir. So you've now got the perfect narrative for the surveillance state, and you can deal with, you want the revolution. You don't care about First Amendment or Second Amendment. So now you start saying, let's push out anti-Semitism laws. Let's enrage Americans. Let's make them think that there's special treatment for one minority class, and that's in violation of the Constitution. Let's arrest people at universities. Let's stoke up all of this stuff that we can, and that all serves the portfolio of those that are able to profit from all of these different trends. So you create a future for extracting value. So at this stage, the financial industrial complex is at the asset stripping stage. Privatize everything, push up the stock market, and strip as many assets through the private equity industry that can acquire those for pennies on the dollar, vassalize the whole West, and build those tools. Just pay politicians to make it look like they're taking on the Democrats and they're playing a scam game. And then the Republicans get to say, we're taking on the deep state. What is taking on the deep state? It's weakening the dollar. When you reveal USAID, you deconstruct the covert operations that propped up the dollar. When you do NATO budgets and war with Russia, you weaken the dollar. When you do tariff policies and make America look like an unstable country that is now focused on America first, you weaken the dollar. And so everything is about strategically, I believe, weakening the dollar to break the pegs, while the financial industrial complex is hedging, where they profit from every scenario anyway.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into first kind of a blend of what we've been saying and Bitcoin, which we'll start with a fun for me, you probably already know. Well, you probably have some sort of intellectual guess, but you'll let us know. But I just created this kind of fun thought experiment before, and I know less. Well, after these interviews, I think I know a lot more. But basically, I I just put out this thing. Everyone makes these kind of "Who is Satoshi" videos, and no one, unless you do, Simon, but like no one really knows who is Satoshi, and of course, as an early adopter myself, it really vibed with me with all the principles it was, preaching and Satoshi was talking about in the forums and stuff. And it really truly felt like a way to kind of break free from, the constraints that you were put under before, and a way to kind of opt out of the existing system. But when I think about everything that we've been talking about, the guys who have essentially been controlling capital markets and the dollar for such a long time, and the evolution of the dollar. And when you have, and the guys that created the Fed, for example, when you have this much power and pretty much unlimited resources, because you can use the smartest minds in the world that work at NSA or the CIA, whatever, plus you probably have internal house of guys that are helping you. I would think that they always want to play on the offense and defense, right? So if you've got unlimited resources, unlimited capital, and the thing that keeps you in power is the fact that you control the money supply and the US dollar, which is the reserve, which everyone, like you would probably want to play offense and defense as much as possible. So one, you would definitely also understand that your fiat currency is unsustainable. It has to come to an end at some point, and so does everyone else's. We can't just keep expanding the debt. So you would be thinking about what comes next after the dollar. How do you make sure that you own that thing? And you'd also be looking at the defense and saying, okay, who's trying to compete with the dollar right now and create something that's, basically who's trying to compete with the dollar by creating a new form of money. And so when I made the video on this, it wasn't too long ago. I said, guys, like this is a 50-50 possibility for me. It's, on one hand, I'd love to believe that it's the benevolent superhero Satoshi that we all hope he is and think that he is. And then maybe this other 50% option is that it was really like a covert operation created by, a 3-letter agency or something like that was instructed to do it by the powers that be. Or maybe it was originally created by Satoshi, but then was quickly opted or grabbed by those guys, and they just outmined everybody. Changed, came into I think was it Blockstream that has some sort of corporate interest over there, and basically have took it over since the early days, and that's their kind of experiment that potentially could put them help them out in a lot of ways. It could keep them in control of the currency that eventually replaces the dollar as a world reserve, or it certainly runs alongside of it. But even more expansion, because it's apolitical. It doesn't belong to anyone. There's no politics. Yeah, it just seems like a really brilliant invention, where someone like the proof of weapon system might want to control. And so we now see things. So that's it. That's what I made the video on. But even more things, like we talked about in the last episode, how there's now this proposal being put out to radically kind of change the way that Bitcoin works, to be able to make it programmatic and put data on it. And there's a lot of true Bitcoiners who are opposing this. And then there's even talk about, that likely we'll have maybe a layer 2 directly on top of Bitcoin that secures everything by Bitcoin, but allows the development of all the applications on the layer 2 for smart contracts and speed and things. And that, if that's the case, and it works really well, and now you have like that blockchain that's backed by Bitcoin, it really leaves it really can strongly take a dominant narrative where, why would you put your technology on any other blockchain that's governed by this token that has no real no longer has a real use case, because now Bitcoin does it all. It's the hardest asset. It's apolitical again. No one who creates it. So it's also being by far the largest asset globally accepted at this point, and the plan is to push that further. So I'm curious on this whole thing, like who created Bitcoin? I don't really. It's just fun for me. It's a fun game. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because the trajectory it's on is already far suggested that, like, whether you think it's Satoshi or you think it's the three letter agency, like, you should just own Bitcoin, right? So yeah, I guess thoughts on all of that, the creation, but also the future of how Bitcoin may adopt, this new build on Bitcoin kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a really important topic to understand, I think, because there's so much nuance in there that just the person that is seeking the quick TikTok video and get an answer to that will get the wrong answer. Because I personally believe that Bitcoin was created from intelligence. I think it's infeasible that Satoshi wouldn't be known who they are unless it did come from intelligence. Now, when I immediately say that, people will be like, "Oh, right, okay. So why would we own Bitcoin?" I created a 3-hour video on this. For someone that wants to dive deep, I created a video on YouTube and on my blog called, "Did the CIA create Bitcoin, and who is Satoshi Nakamoto? The secret identity of Satoshi Nakamoto." I won't say who I think it is, but I did go through all the different options. And the most important thing to understand in this conversation is that, remember everything we said about intelligence. So they work through compartmentalization, where no one really knows the whole plan. And you get whistleblowers and you get rogue actors. So you have got an unaccountable, decentralized structure of power within those intelligence networks. And you can only imagine how ruthless that game is, right? We know that most of the technology behind Bitcoin requires that level, and within the intelligence apparatus, I do believe you have cypherpunks, you have the whistleblowers, you have the Snowdens, you have the NSA contractors, and you have the wiki. There, people are continuing to WikiLeaks right now. That's inside the system because they feel that by staying in the system, they can release things about the system that helps break the system, and they continue to be a part of that system. And so there's so much nuance in that conversation. But I personally think that pretty much everything behind Bitcoin, with the exception of how it was put together, was from those cypherpunk, from that intelligence. And if you look at some of the cypherpunks, you can see, different types of connections to intelligence and various other things. The evidence is overwhelming when you look into it. And I went through all of it. But what
I did it. I think my video was like 40 minutes. So
okay.
For everyone watching, we'll put a link to my video down below and Simon's "What Was Bitcoin a CIA Project?" If anyone feels like really diving deep on this, check out both. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on.
I think it's important to do it though, because I think you need conviction to stay through Bitcoin and not be fooled into the psyop of selling.
100%. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And so if you don't have answers to, is quantum computing about to take down Bitcoin? Did the CIA or the NSA create Bitcoin? If you don't know the answer to those questions, you will sell in the next FUD cycle, and you will be selling to Wall Street, and Wall Street will have your Bitcoin, and you will be a slave to the system. That's a fact. And so that's a very important thing, I think, to build your conviction. And I have zero fear of any of those things because I've done enough. I put my time in. Now, the most important thing is that somebody open sourced it, because this was built off, DigiCash, proof of work, a lot of innovations that made up Bitcoin. And it was combined and open sourced. And the white paper went out to the cypherpunk movement. And personally, I just think the CIA know who Satoshi is. You know, you can't remain that anonymous in this world today from that level of control. And so why is that? You know, why is that? But the most important thing is understanding how Bitcoin is constructed. What is Bitcoin? Well, it's open source code, which is vital, you know, where the largest distributed supercomputer get to mine blocks and add blocks to the chain with the largest amount of security in a distributed supercomputer located in countries that geopolitically hate each other and are enemies. That's very important. And then there are anyone that can back up and run a node. And when the nodes want to resist against coordinated Silicon Valley venture capitalists or coordinated BlackRocks that want to get board seats on all the US public mining companies and create an ETF and weaponize and vassalize a company like Strategy, and also use their Silicon Valley network in order to control as many companies and create Coinbase as a public company, and also create public companies like Circle with stablecoin. All of this financial industrial complex, all of the infrastructure pieces, all of the derivatives, all of the paper Bitcoin, all of the Bitcoin industrial complex to centralize as much Bitcoin as possible in the hands of Wall Street players in the network. You have a user activated soft fork. And at the end of the day, you have core and you have Bitcoin improvement proposals and you have open source debates around those. And when those ones get too corrupt, you have competing implementations. It's the most decentralized thing we have in the world. It's not perfect. It's got attack vectors, but all of those attack vectors are open source and debated. And whenever you have, let's say, Blockstream was a force for centralization, consolidating core developers being funded by a bunch of VCs, then you have a centralizing force. And there was a resistance against that. And it led to Bitcoin Cash and all sorts of stuff. Bitcoin didn't change from being Bitcoin. But that debate is still had, and there are books written about what that was and what these centralizing forces are. So what you have to understand is that there is nothing better. You know, Zcash ain't coming to solve the problem for you. Monero ain't coming to solve the problem for you. You know, they can be 51% attacked. We know that zero knowledge proof was a Tel Aviv project. We know that it relied upon Peter Todd destroying his key and 5 others. And then maybe it was replaced with code over time. But why all of a sudden are we being bombarded in our algorithm that Zcash is the thing you should be buying now? Why all of a sudden are we bombarded with information that we knew before about JP Morgan settling with Jeffrey Epstein network and the MIT having a funding mechanism that also supported some Bitcoin core developers to connect Jeffrey Epstein to that? Why is that coming all of a sudden? You know, these are operations.
Yeah.
And because everyone wants your Bitcoin. And
exactly. Yeah. You create the narrative, create the pump, make everyone else believe it's a issue about privacy and that kind of stuff. So you sell your Bitcoin, you buy Zcash, and this is you're selling it directly to everyone.
Were these open source libraries and code that is contributed to the construct of Bitcoin created by NSA and intelligence? I believe so, yes. Was somebody connected to DigiCash and the takedown of DigiCash and what eventually became Bitcoin? Was that leaked into cypherpunk from intelligence? I personally believe yes. I also have the characters that I think were connected, and I think it's multiple people, and many of them are not alive and they can't control the keys anymore. But do I understand the construct of Bitcoin to know that that's not necessarily an issue? Absolutely. Because it really doesn't matter. But do I know that also that narrative is perfect for getting people to sell their Bitcoin and end up in a crypto scam? Absolutely. Yes. So you have to be smarter, because there ain't a person in the world that's going to be able to change that there are 21 million Bitcoin. There ain't a person in the world that's going to be able to change the fact that Bitcoin is pseudonymous. So all transactions are published, but you can use a coin join, or you can use a hardware wallet that creates a new wallet address for every single transaction. But there are a bunch of forces that want you to own an ETF, that want you to not own it in self custody, that don't want you to create a unique wallet address for every transaction, that don't want you to run a node, that don't want you to use a coin join, that do want to put Samurai wallet developers in prison. And there is attack after attack after attack after attack. And when Bitcoin was too centralized in China, and now Bitcoin is too centralized in America, we need to understand how Bitcoin works, because there is a tragedy of the commons, which is a problem in economics. The tragedy of the commons is if everyone relies on BlackRock to own their Bitcoin, and everyone relies on Coinbase to secure it in custody, and if everyone relies upon public companies in America to mine Bitcoin, and if everyone relies on one version of an implementation, of the code, and doesn't attack the developers, and doesn't create competing, and doesn't engage in this conversation, and doesn't run nodes, then essentially you create a centralized database of a few companies that control everything in a few countries. And is somebody trying to do that? Yes, they are. And what is the resistance against it? Will they win? No, they won't. Because as long as there is a core group of people that understand this, then they will prop up the network in this tragedy of commons. And we need more people to do it. And we need more people to understand it. But there ain't another shot at this. We're not going to come up with another chain. The set of circumstances that led to the creation of Bitcoin are a moment in time that cannot be replicated with today's information, because every single coin is created by somebody, and that somebody needs funding from something, and that something could be pre-mined, or it could be Silicon Valleyed, or it could be PR'd and pressed, and it is connected to making a bunch of money because exchanges exist today. And the models of how to make money from printing money, printing stock, printing crypto, printing derivatives, printing anything, printing bonds, is very well understood. And there are only a couple of assets: gold in custody and Bitcoin in self-custody. And Bitcoin is the digital representation. We're not going to get another Bitcoin. So we need to preserve Bitcoin. We need to understand the problems. And if it came from intelligence, there will be people that will try and scare you into thinking that. So you need to understand, what does Bitcoin do and what doesn't it do? It's pseudonymous. Their ability to track transactions on the blockchain by design, because we don't want this network that relies upon someone destroying keys like Zcash, that has anonymous transactions that you can't necessarily see on the blockchain. And that doesn't mean that people won't use those for different types of use case, but in terms of money you can own, money you can spend, money that has a fixed supply in rules that can't be changed by a central bank, we ain't getting another shot at this. Bitcoin's the only one.
Okay, so you briefly touched on this in the last episode, but I want to go down a little bit more in that rabbit hole, because since we last spoke, I've had one of my friends reach out to me and say, "Hey, do you think it's possible that the government might confiscate our Bitcoin the same way they did gold, back in the day?" And I hadn't really heard. I just basically told him, like, I don't know, maybe. I haven't thought about it a lot. I think at first thought I thought that was kind of ridiculous, especially. But then he asked that morning. In the afternoon, the YouTube algorithm showed me a video from a channel I never watched before that like went through this whole kind of example of the language of the executive order compared to the executive orders before, where they made gold a strategic reserve and now Bitcoin is a strategic reserve, and how the language is very similar and the setup is very similar. And then then there was the next day I saw a video from Swan Bitcoin that talked about the America for Bitcoin, or Bitcoin for America Act, where now you can start to use your Bitcoin to pay your taxes, and you don't have to pay capital gains if you do that. So clearly, they really want you to be using your Bitcoin for your taxes and accumulating more. And then we have this huge debt problem that I think that we need to somehow solve. So one hypothesis was, from that video specifically, I have not since checked any of it, but what he said was, basically, if you can create another moment where they tell you it's illegal to own gold and it's for the benefit of our country, and just bring us all your Bitcoin and we'll give you fair market value, but it won't be fair market value really, but close to it probably. And everyone whose Bitcoin is in custody right now with Coinbase and all the ETFs and centralized Bitcoin lending platforms and everything like that, they'll have no choice but to comply with that new order. And so already you've lost your Bitcoin. They'll send you dollars or something in your bank to compensate you for it, whatever. And then you'll have people who are just willing to do whatever the government says. And so they'll willingly go to their bank and change in the Bitcoin for dollars, because now you have to. They don't want to be doing anything illegal, and they believe it's for the better cause probably. And so everything that Yo and I have talked about, the accumulation, everything like that, plus the potential of this kind of happening. And then there's two ways that it can go from here, where now the government is in control of most of your Bitcoin and now has taken it from you, essentially. You could do a couple things. Well, one, you can reprice Bitcoin. The video argues that if you own the majority of the Bitcoin around the world and you sanction other countries from using it, like you can really say what you could price it at kind of what you think is what you say is fair market value or something. So you could see an instant repricing from 100 grand to $1 million, essentially, if the U.S. decides it to be that, and that would give it, I think close to close to $1 trillion plus in value. No, way more than that, right? Because you've repriced it to $1 million per coin. So a huge amount of value there. And then if they reprice gold to what, from what it's priced right now at $34 an ounce or whatever it is to, let's say, $10,000, now the US is sitting on all of this value. And they're also in doing that, they also debase the dollar further. Dollar gets super weak. And so the loans that we owe, the debt that we owe priced in dollars, goes from 39 trillion dollars down to 90% less than that. And now you've got plenty of equity essentially to pay off the loans, and this is one way that they could do it. And the argument was that that's what it was used for before. And the other argument might be that we might just sell off, like the same thing happens, confiscation, and then we just sell off all the gold, buy even more Bitcoin. And again, we say that gold is the reserve, at least for all our allies. And by selling the gold, you drop you seriously drop the value of it. You increase float, and also people will maybe follow suit because they see what's happening with Bitcoin, and they want to jump on that train too. So I'm just curious to get your thoughts on kind of what is potentially possible very soon, and what you've talked about on the last episode and today is the only way to protect yourself from an event like this is to self-custody, and also probably not be here, when in America when that happens. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this theory overall. And yeah.
Yeah, so I think we are at the stage when people should be theorizing about these things and thinking about, well, what if? Um, and as crazy and as wild as it sounds, there is historical precedent for doing such things. And so obviously most people can only imagine the things that they've experienced in their life. But right now, if you ask somebody, do you reckon they could lock everyone in their homes and do a pandemic? Like most people, because they've experienced that, they can imagine how it would happen. But prior to that, they'd be like, don't be ridiculous. That's a conspiracy theory, right? That couldn't happen. And so the thing that we the reason that there are cycles that are generational is because we only know what we've experienced in terms of reality, in terms of cognitive, experiential belief about what can happen based upon our experience. And we find it hard to imagine things that we haven't experienced before can happen. That's like a human psyche, something. I don't know what the psychological name of it, but cognitive dissonance or something. Anyway, we should think about these things. Now, the reason I don't think it will happen is because in order for that to happen, you'd have to believe that the US is sovereign and wants to protect the dollar and wants to dominate the world continually. There is not a set of circumstances when America has 25% of the world GDP and 75% of it is foreign, the rest of the world, where America is able to globally dominate as it did during the 1930s leading up to World War II and the Bretton Woods era. That required a manufacturing base, that required 75% of the gold reserves. It required completely different set of circumstances to what we have today. It was even the dollar was convertible to gold at that stage. The dollar is no longer convertible to gold. The dollar is a function of who will buy another treasury. That's it. And so at the moment, if you look at where all the treasuries are, they're Cayman Island, which means the financial industrial complex, because that's a tiny economy that is doing that has lent the US government $1.8 trillion. And it's also, that's where this is happening. So do we believe that America is sovereign and trying to protect the dollar and trying to dominate? I don't believe America is sovereign anymore for all the reasons I've explained. Every single company is vassalized into the financial industrial complex. All the politicians are bought by lobby. Senate and Congress are lobbied. And I think the deep state we're seeing more and more and more is able to influence judicial. So whose agenda is the world servicing right now? Well, it's finance. So America is the banks. That's what it is now. So then I ask myself, do the banks want to save America? Do the banks want to save the dollar? Do the banks want to give the government more power and give them Bitcoin? The answer is absolutely not. The government is a piggy bank for the banks. They just want them to, continue printing more and more debt, roll over the debt, and pump it into the stock market. So I don't believe that the banks and financial institutions at this stage want to protect the dollar because they're hedging away from the dollar. And so therefore, would they go through such a scheme, which would be interested? Then you have to ask, what is the dollar? Well, the dollar is debt. So if every dollar is somebody else's debt, what happens if you pay off the debt? You crash the dollar. There's not enough money in the world to pay off the debt. That's a Great Depression. Thinking that a government wants to pay off the debt is an absurd thought when you understand how the dollar works. Their job is to roll over the debt. It's not to pay off the debt. And so who would want those Bitcoin? The private sector, the ones that are vassalizing strategy right now is who wants the Bitcoin. They don't want to give it to the government. This is the privatization phase. This is the vassalization phase. And this is the weakening of the dollar phase by those that are in charge of America. So I can't imagine a set of circumstances where the banks want to give the Bitcoin to the government, make the government more powerful, and save the dollar, unless you believe that the government is sovereign, trying to make America great again and is in charge, which I just fundamentally don't believe. So the way more likely scenario is that the banks are trying to centralize Bitcoin. They're trying to get you to lever up, and they're weakening the dollar and switching to a multipolar world. I think is the set of circumstances we're in right now. Now, way more useful is Bitcoin in a multipolar world. That's the most interesting thing. Bitcoin in an American-centric hegemon, that's a disaster. If the American government ended up owning shitloads of Bitcoin and BlackRock ended up vassalizing all of the industries in America, and America became the capital of Bitcoin with more and more Bitcoin in America, that would be the worst thing for Bitcoin you could ever imagine. And fortunately, I don't think the banks are doing that right now. So if that happens, we have a resistance that needs to fight against that through international capital flows. I personally don't believe, and there's also a couple of nuances there. Like when the gold confiscation happened, the dollar was convertible into gold and they needed gold reserves to meet those obligations. The dollar's not convertible into Bitcoin other than in the FX market. So I think way more likely is fiscal dominance. They're not trying to pay off the debt and they're hedging against that. And the government won't end up with the Bitcoin. But theoretically, can it happen? Probably the people in the internet that believe that Trump's trying to make America great again and he's a resistance against the banks and trust the plan because Q is going to have a plan and Trump is the messiah that's going to take down the financial system, then maybe that happens. I don't believe that's real. I think that's a psyop that came from intelligence in order to manufacture compliance for the fact that the banks are engaging in a civil unrest campaign and a strategic weakening of the dollar for America.
Okay, so now I want to get into what's happening on, and you've already talked about the need for resistance and more core developers and independent node operators to fight kind of for these things. But what's happening right now? Maybe you can give a quick overview of what's happening right now. The big kind of argument about changing Bitcoin's core kind of functionality to make it more programmatic, and then also the idea of making a layer 2 on top of blockchain that is like better than any other alt layer 1, or at least as good, or as at least can easily compete with all those alt layer 1s like Solana and Sui and Ethereum and stuff. If that could happen, or if you think that it would happen, then that would really strengthen Bitcoin's core use case in a way. And then it might make those other blockchains less relevant because people want to, everyone kind of believes in Bitcoin as far as like long-term store of wealth and global acceptance and adoption. Everyone's less certain about everything else.
Yeah, I personally subscribe to the ideology that you don't need to worry about what the alternative blockchains and crypto are doing. In the long term, most people get wrecked because they're on the wrong side of the VCs. And most of these, if you look through crypto after crypto after crypto, you just see a bunch of shady companies and shady funding and pre-mines and all sorts of shit that none of them compete with Bitcoin. And so I'm okay with you do whatever you need to do, but Bitcoin doesn't need to change. I'm not worried about, okay, if Ethereum is more useful, everyone's going to stop using Bitcoin and using Ethereum. History hasn't shown that. And I don't think they don't compete. They just absolutely do not compete, other than fiat currency bandits that are just here for the dollars. The traders, the speculators, the people that haven't dug deep, the people that are just trying to figure out how to gamble and make more dollars, are the ones that don't know the difference between these different cryptos and blockchains. And we haven't got another Bitcoin, and we're not going to get another Bitcoin. And I personally believe that we should do at least 2 Bitcoin as possible, because Bitcoin's working. And we need to be as conservative as possible, and we need to hedge competing. We just need to work on making sure that there are hedges for the attack vectors. And all the fiat currency and crypto system, just carry on doing what you're doing. The fiat currency system is imploding on itself because it's a Ponzi scheme. The crypto is a pump and dump scheme for Silicon Valley to enrich himself and insiders to end up with more Bitcoin. And all we need to do is make sure that Bitcoin is as decentralized as it can be, and recognizing and hedging against as many attack vectors as it can be. Do we need to make Bitcoin do everything that Ethereum does? I don't see why. I don't think it's needed. I think we just need to remain conservative, and allow Bitcoin to do what it's doing, because Bitcoin has got way further than anyone could ever imagine, and it will get way further. And the important thing to me is, can I own my own money in self-custody? Can I spend it on an innocent until proven guilty system where they'd actually have to, subpoena my Bitcoin if I commit crime or whatever? I'm okay with that trade-off. But can I spend it without permission? And can I ensure that there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoins? And that's never going to change. As long as those 3 things exist, we will give people a way of boycotting the system, a way of freeing themselves, a way of companies resisting against Silicon Valley and Wall Street, and a way of taking your wealth wherever you need to go based upon how oppressive your government gets. And do I have an ability to say, you know what? The financial industrial complex will probably end up with a bunch of Bitcoin. They'll do all sorts of shenanigans with Bitcoin. But can I boycott them at least? Can I say my money is not going to contribute to that? And that's what's important to me. And then I want to build my community of people to make sure that we've got at least a big enough community of people that think that way. And we can't outtrade Wall Street. We're never going to beat them with leverage. We're never going to beat them with trading. We're never going to beat them by outsmarting them on short trades. They're always going to win that game. They've got access to the money printer. They've got access to regulatory capture. They own the governments. Everything you see that is resisting against that is not real. It's only the boycott that's real. And so you every single person can win as an investor. Isn't that a beautiful thing? And by an investor, I mean that you have more than a 1-year time frame. You just own more Bitcoin each month, regardless of price. Like, that's enough. Let's preserve that now. But if people completely disagree with me, that's okay. We have an open source debate. It's ideas. It's we go nuts at each other, and it needs to stay that way. That's what it is designed to do. It is an open source boardroom with crazy people from all around the world, and that is Bitcoin, and it's a beautiful thing.
What are your thoughts on this current kind of decision coming from the MSCI on kind of restructuring their index that would, essentially exclude strategy from that index, removing passive flows? I mean, MSCI is just one index of many, right? So it's not like Yeah, and it's not really setting. And I think Sailor's the only company out there that actually exceeds that. What is it? If all assets are above 70% or 50% or something like that, 50%, then they're excluded and can't be excluded in this index that earns passive flows. Do you think the MSCI is actually like that's got to be influenced from somewhere else, right? And Strategy owns they hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, right? They're not buying ETFs, I believe, or maybe they are in some products. I'm not sure, but it kind of seems to me like the banks would influence something like this, and maybe that goes from MSCI to it goes to other indexes to where right now the estimates seem to be about they would need to sell $2.8 billion off of Bitcoin off in order to be included in the MSCI index. So that would be kind of scaring the market a little bit about that. But they say that it's potentially a lot bigger if other indexes follow the rule too, and maybe that has resulted in Sailor selling off $11 billion plus of Bitcoin. I don't even know if Sailor really cares about the indexes too much so much. I think because it didn't seem like that was his original plan. It was maybe nice that he was included in passive flows, but do you think that this was a plan from the banks and the kind of proof of weapons network, or do you think that Michael's now part of that? Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, what is Michael Saylor? Michael Saylor was an executive of a public company, and now he's a chairman of a public company. The executives of a public company work for the board. The board's installed by the shareholders. The shareholders are the investors. Who are the shareholders? Institutional investors and retail investors. Retail don't matter. Institutions do. So he works for Wall Street. What else did he do? He created a strategy for putting Bitcoin on his balance sheet, and now the corporate company that he has a fiduciary duty to, is he needs to maximize value for his shareholders. In the mix, he took on debt, and so he created products that gave fiat currency liabilities. This is the creep, right? This is the mission creep. You start with maximizing your equity through Bitcoin and Treasury. You then create a company that looks more like a hedge fund investment vehicle, not a hedge fund investment vehicle, which means that you're no longer a traditional security because of regulatory capture. So you have the Investment Company Act of 1940 that states that if more of your revenue is derived from investment, then you are an investment company. And if you're an operating company, you need to pull back your income from investments and push forward your income from operations. These are ways of not skirting around the hedge fund rules, because hedge funds are for accredited investors. The public markets are for retail investors, right? All of these regulatory capture vehicles that the financial industrial complex ultimately influences through its lobbies a regulatory capture. So now what do? You introduce a new type of preference share that is connected to a fiat currency liability. Then you have a new perpetual dividend that outperforms the average index fund. Now you have corporate debt investors. Now you have investors that would have been from traditional, more conservative money markets, but you're paying a higher return. These are trying to supplement their income to bow down to the proof of weapons network so they don't get knocked off the network in their next annual performance. Strategy is a vassal for Wall Street. Strategy is not taking on JP Morgan. Strategy is part of the financial industrial complex. The resistance is not strategy versus JP Morgan. It's self-custody versus centralization of Bitcoin. So now if strategy succeeds, they get 1 million Bitcoin, 2 million Bitcoin, 3 million Bitcoin, 4 million Bitcoin, tied to Wall Street financial products. Now you've got the perfect vehicle for manipulating the price of Bitcoin anytime you want to knock strategy off the network. And what tools do you use? The tools that Wall Street has historically used is investment banks produce research, buy, hold, sell, lukewarm. You think that's research? I used to work in an investment bank, and the corporate finance division works with the analyst. The analyst gets an order from Goldman Sachs, and depending on what Goldman Sachs wants to do and wants the price to be, the research comes out. The market makers meant to have a Chinese wall with the corporate finance, but I've never went to a lunch where the corporate finance team didn't tell the market maker, make sure you're not naked short, make sure you're long, something's coming. These insider trading games, yes, there are all sorts of rules, but none of them are enforceable. This is regulatory capture. Okay. Strategy is a resistance to centralize as much Bitcoin to give Wall Street the best tool they can to manipulate the price of Bitcoin. It's the classic textbook vassalization. So where is strategy now? It's got 650,000 Bitcoin. It's got $54 million cash. It's got a small revenue stream. And it's got 700 million of liabilities that it has to meet for its shareholders, for its bondholders, for those that are expecting dividends. And it requires volatility on some of those products. It requires stability on other products. It requires maximizing shareholder value on some of those products. It requires screwing shareholders through debt and corporate debt. So now you have created and engineered a game so that whenever Wall Street wants to send the hedge funds or the corporate raiders or destroy the share price to manipulate the price of Bitcoin, to create cascading liquidations, to create sell pressure on Bitcoin, to get more Bitcoin via its network that it's created by levering everyone up and getting everyone to borrow against their Bitcoin and use their derivative products, it has created the perfect vehicle for achieving this. This is not an attack on Michael Saylor. This is not an attack on Jack Mallers, who got very upset with some of the comments I gave. This is recognition of what Wall Street does. It is a mafia that vassalizes countries and companies in order to extract resources and leave everyone else in debt slavery. That is the mission. And it has its money printing and debt-based Ponzi scheme called the dollar as its primary tool to push money into the debt capital markets and the equity capital markets. And so what is a share price today? It is a function of your ability to get the government to roll over the debt. That's it. What else is it? It's the ability to use credit ratings and index funds in order to have passive inflows. And if you bow down to our agenda, if you play nicely, then I might give you a little bit of debt and borrow against your stock so that you can end up on the right side of the network. And index funds are the perfect vehicle for doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So you think that strategy has two paths it could choose, or one path that maybe only one path it could choose that would keep it alive and perpetually going, and that would be whatever the banks and the proof of weapon system wants Saylor to do.
So, yeah, sorry, Carl, go on.
Or do you think it's just inevitable at some point? The end game would just be like let's just crash this company right now, take all the Bitcoin, and then that's it.
Strategy is incredibly useful to Wall Street. Why would you want to kill it? Why would you want to kill the golden goose that's laying the golden egg?
I guess to take the Bitcoin, no?
Yeah, I mean, strategy is very hard to replicate. You've got a company that can centralize as much Bitcoin as possible. They will goose that until they got as much Bitcoin as possible. Then at the end of it, if they want to send it into Chapter 11, they can knock down the price of Bitcoin short term, send it into Chapter 11, dollarize the value. But they need to lever it up a lot more first. They'll launch way more products. You got to get more debt. You got to get more corporate debt in there. You got to lever this stuff up as much as possible. So you've got 54,700 million of obligations. That's the perfect vassal. How do you meet those obligations? You either create another financial product, whether it's debt or equity, to pay it. Great. That's more vassalization to the investors, the institutional investors, the ones that will write the terms, the investment bank that Strategy would have hired in order to construct these products for them. This isn't a person. This is a financial industrial complex that's hired in order to construct these products. And you only get your order filled. Do you think you get 21 billion filled in a second without the institutional liquidity, without the broker-dealer relationships, without the financial industrial complex that the investment bank has set up? And do you think they don't have terms and conditions in order to put those billions in? They're going to make sure that they're the preferential, the retailer last, of course. So you either create another product, or you generate more revenue, which doesn't seem to be the plan. The numbers don't add up, or you sell Bitcoin. I don't know another option. One of you creating more products means more vassalization to Wall Street. Generating more revenue probably means creating a bank, regulatory capture. You're no longer a Bitcoin strategy, you're no longer a Bitcoin treasury company. You're something else, a VC fund or a private equity or a different type of play. Or the third is you sell the Bitcoin, violate the promise. And who decides whether Strategy does that? He's the chairman. He's got shareholder vote. But the construct of Wall Street is you work for your shareholders and your debt holders. Wall Street owns Strategy. So if you want to create a fake narrative that Wall Street is taking on JP Morgan, very convenient given that JP Morgan has significant influence over the media. And everyone will lap it up. What does that create? It creates volatility. Who creates more fees? The financial industrial complex. Who gets to weaponize more derivatives, deploy their hedge funds, do what they need to do? They are managing a portfolio that loves every second. You are enabling Wall Street to become more power in Bitcoin by buying in and perpetuating these false narratives. Because the real resistance is Bitcoin and self-custody. Opt out, don't speculate, don't borrow against your Bitcoin, and become an investor and play an infinite game, because Bitcoin and self-custody is the infinite game. Strategy is a finite game of wrapping Bitcoin in a Wall Street wrapper in order to create a collateralized Bitcoin obligation.
Exactly. I mean, I was just looking at the top shareholders of Strategy, and you've got, everyone's in there. Vanguard, Jane Street. I don't know what Capital Research and Management Co., but it says international investors. Probably the I don't know, just everyone else from.
And who's the number one shareholder in all of those?
Huh?
And who's the number one shareholder in all of those?
And everything I've talked about so far?
Yeah, you list a bunch of shareholders in Strategy. Yeah. Who's the number one shareholder in those? BlackRock,
Vanguard.
State Street, and Vanguard.
Yeah, actually, so Vanguard is, according to this thing, Vanguard is 7.5%. Jane Street is 6.3%. This Capital Research Management Company is 7.689. BlackRock is 4.8%. And then State Street, 2.269%. And then something called Eaton Vance Management is up there too. And then there's, of course, Cantor Fitzgerald and all that stuff. But yeah, they're, of course,
let's go through all of those. Vanguard is your private capital. It's not a public company.
Right.
BlackRock is your Signal. That's your public company.
Yeah.
Cantor Fitzgerald is your covert primary broker dealer that can construct, wrap up these products into money printing. And then Jane Street is your hedge fund. You have the entire financial industrial complex that can use this as a vehicle for controlling the price of Bitcoin short term and vassalizing as much Bitcoin as they want in that network. And they will be on the cap table of many, many other companies. And the further the price of Bitcoin goes, the further, the more and more Bitcoin strategy centralizes, the more and more control these institutions receive, because they're printing the money and putting in the capital and have access to the capital flows. So centralize Bitcoin and give it to more Wall Street control. Yay, we're taking on the system.
We basically kind of covered what I wanted to ask from last episode to get more clarity on and more elaboration. But then we started getting into things that are kind of more relevant now. So we covered a lot of kind of the things that happened in the past. We started talking about recent events, but I got more questions on that. And some of the things that I think the audience wanted the most, we didn't even get to talk about this time, which was kind of what happens, between AI and, these, what we all believe, but maybe it's not true. And maybe it's more designed from the top, which is the new kind of, the new arms race, if you will, or Cold War between who builds the best AI models at US, China, whatever, or you would kind of, I don't know. For some reason, I would kind of imagine that the government already has the best model or whatever, but I don't know. But like how this thing, all this stuff kind of evolves when super intelligence comes into play. I'm also curious, like, what are the odds that like this proof of weapons network actually gets dissolved because some super intelligent artificial intelligence just decides that like, hey, I'm taking over now, like and then there would be nothing that they could really do about it because it's just a million times smarter than all their top analysts combined, and they have no clue what to do against something like that. So, I mean, I'm really curious. Another one that I had, another question, is like, what are you doing yourself to prepare over the next 5, 10, 15 years and more? So again, I'd love for you to come back to the show soon. Guys, let me know in the comments too if you want to hear the answer to some of these questions. And also let me know in the comments too, guys, if you have any questions of your own. I will definitely try to get those included if Simon's willing to come back soon. I think as long as we keep having demand from the audience, hopefully we'll keep doing them. Simon, again, we'll put all your socials and links of things that you've talked about in the show description. And is there anything else that you want to? Of course, thank you so much. Again, I learned a ton this time, and I feel like I'm starting to kind of learn how to build these things and answer my own questions. You kind of have to form that foundation of the underlying kind of, like as you call the proof of weapons or network. Yeah. So once you understand that, and it didn't really completely understand it after the first talk, and I'm getting better understanding that this time, and now I'm able to kind of answer some of my own questions, or at least assume how you might answer them. So I'm learning a lot. Thanks a lot for that. And is there anything else that you want to add before we end this?
Yeah, I reckon in the next one, then let's hone in on the AI conversation and how that connects to the proof of weapons network and the financial side. I do think that that's where we can get a lot more speculative and enter into the world of way less predictability in the unknown, because we are entering into an unknown. And I think all of those questions are really interesting questions that we'll cover next time.
Post scarcity, like one of the things I just can't wrap my head around yet is, this idea of post scarcity economics. And I've seen many takes on it, right, from very smart people. And I'm having like a hard time believing that any of those are exactly true. I know they're all speculating too, but it makes it so hard to so hard to speculate on what that might look like in the long term. Maybe if we don't have like in the shorter term, if we just have like really, really, really smart intelligence that we're somehow able to still work alongside of us in a collaborative mode um, for the next, let's say, 5, 10 years or something like that, 15 even maybe, then we could potentially look at how that might form, and then ultimately what that would look like if that 50% possibility that ASI becomes friendly and likes us and decides to keep us around. And none of that matters if it doesn't, right? So, not for us at least. So yeah, these are all things that I
Yeah,
think
we can go into, are we in an AI bubble? That's an interesting question in itself. Is this all narrative? Is this a psyop? Are we meant to be embracing, resisting? Is there meant to be decentralized versus centralized? So these are all important conversations for us to have. So yeah, I would say just in terms of wrapping up, I follow every week. I go live on a Friday where I do this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and this week in geopolitics, and you start to get used to these frameworks, and you can test them out. What someone came up the other day and said they were very skeptical about the things that I said, so they went back to 30 episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk and they went back to previous years and said how much of what Simon was predicting came true. And by the end of it, I think he understood the framework and said, actually, I found that, and I'll admit when I'm wrong, because these are, you're engaging in speculation, but following the money rather than narrative and media and understanding what they want you to believe versus what is true, I have found has got me ahead of many trends. And it's you can get used to these things once you start seeing it week after week.
I completely understand what you're talking about. I think that would be another separate episode, or maybe it's just continuing on right after the AI discussion. Maybe we talk about that. I've been very curious for a long time because I'm not someone who draws lines on a chart, and I don't short-term trade either, so it doesn't really matter to me. But I'm learning as I go along, and I think it's really silly to believe that a nascent young asset that was tied to a narrative that of reminding people about the scarcity of Bitcoin every 4 years, but we've already known that. It's not like this is something that has been priced in from people the day they look at it. Like that's the main driving cause of why it's good or different. So, but everyone, especially on crypto Twitter and YouTube and stuff like that, it's all price action and predicting, this and that based on previous cycles. And I just found it really hard to imagine, a situation that was vastly different than what everyone believed it to be. And there must be a different reason. And so, I've been working on like a very in-depth report to try to kind of, with probabilities of like where we are in this current cycle, but what's actually driving the markets and how people can look at those and understand. And I'm sure it's very, very aligned with what you've been talking about. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And hopefully by the time we actually make that episode, I'll be done with what I have too. And so I can ask you like these assumptions that I've made, do they line up with what you think and things like that?
Okay, Kyle. Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, look forward to the next one.
Cool. Thanks, Simon. Appreciate your time.
Bye bye.